Hello, welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. I'm your host, Tim Masso, and everything you see here is for sale. Reach out to me, tmasso at thewatchbox.com, for purchase and pricing details of any watch you see here. I have pricing for all watches, plus accessories, condition, and availability. As you see this on Wednesday morning, if you're watching it in the first 24 hours, everything is in stock. We buy, we trade, we sell. We are always looking to build inventories. If you want to sell or trade a watch, reach out to me, tmasso at thewatchbox.com. We pay cash. We pay fast. No upper limit on value paid. We will buy your entire collection. Today's episode is overstuffed with watches, so I have to move quickly. I really overstuffed this one with the best stuff. If there's a theme today, it's a lot of a good thing, maybe too much. All of these are high-value watches, starting with the Patek Philippe Calatrava 6000G. Now, this is the model as it debuted back in 2005. In 2008, it would receive a gray sunburst metallic dial. So for 2005, 6, and 7, this was the original variant with a matte black dial, radially arrayed numerals for both the hour of the day and the date. It has a lunette-style pointer date. You can see the dial as well as the case design clearly descended from the 1992 reference 5000, and it is quite beautiful with an almost flat, very shallow domed bezel and strong lug profiles. For a 37mm watch, it reads larger. On the reverse side, caliber 240, something that's always set the 5000s, the 6000s, and the 6006s apart is the presence of a micro rotor auto rather than the cheaper and more common center rotor Patek automatics. Now you can see this one being pre-2009, all of the first version 6000Gs are, but they have the Geneva hallmark rather than the later Patek Philippe seal. 5-position adjusted, micro rotor auto, 48-hour power reserve, gyro max style free sprung balance, and a gorgeous Geneva hallmark movement in a case that wears frankly a little bit large for 37. It's got a lot more wrist presence because of the strength of those lugs, and the watch always had the look of a vintage 1950s or 60s automotive dashboard instrument on the wrist. It really does look like a speedometer, a tachometer, maybe even a clock from a Porsche, Mercedes-Benz, or Jaguar from the period. Now, jumping into the realm of boutique brands and independents, my personal favorite, de Bethune, they make about 200 to 220 watches a year. This one is one of the most practical. It includes a 6-day, or I should say 5-day, automatic winding power reserve and a perpetual calendar. So it will wind itself, and if you put it down for a day or two, you're not going to have to reset that complicated calendar. Now, they make their own cases, dials, and movements, so this is all in-house. They even did their own guilloche to create this rosette center dial. We have a spherical moon phase made of 1/2 white palladium, 1/2 blued steel. It has an adjustment interval of once every 1,112 years. The perpetual calendar module, of course, doesn't need to be adjusted until the year 2100. The module is of their own design, so is the base movement. The case is thin, but 44mm in rose gold. You can see on the reverse side, the movement has a shock-protected rotor, twin mainspring barrels, 1, 2, 3 shock protection springs, a proprietary hairspring design, and a proprietary balance designed to put most of the mass at the outer edge, reduce the effects of aerodynamic drag, and reduce the effects of temperature on timing. So you have two crossed yokes. It's not a wheel, it's non-annular, and two crossed yokes of blued titanium and then platinum masts outboard. Everything you see here is blued titanium. De Bethune has a patented process for fire bluing titanium, and you can see it surrounding the moon phase on the dial side. A large watch at 44mm. It's not a huge watch, but I'd recommend your wrist at least be the size of mine, 16 centimeters circumference, to wear this one well. Now, this is not the limit of what's available from the company based out of Lauberson. If you want the iconic model, then you want the DB28. This is a 50-piece limited edition in grade 5 titanium and black zirconium. It is extremely light, extremely scratch resistant, and it is a 50-piece limited edition version of the watch that won the 2011 GPHG Egido, or the best picture at the Oscars of watchmaking for the best watch of the year. And you can see why. There's a lot of innovation here. For one thing, the floating lugs. Spring-loaded and variable geometry. They're designed to make sure you get a good fit. Second, the watch is thin, under 12mm thick. We have a balance wheel, updated now. This is a later version of the evolving de Bethune balance. This one is a silicon disc with a white gold rim. Once again, we get 1, 2, 3 shock protection springs, but now you can see that both the springs and the balance bridge are black polished. We have a black polished cap on the deltoid barrel bridge, 2 barrels, 6-day power reserve. You can see the spherical moon phase again, same 1,112-year adjustment interval. We have Côte de Bethune across the bridges, and if you look carefully, you can see mirrored anglage on the edge. All the traditional finishing standards are respected. We have black polished cabochon of titanium representing the hour track, and a little power reserve indicator peeking out between those 2 jewels it travels as you wind it. Turn the watch all over, and you can see that the more extensive power reserve indicator is visible on the reverse, along with the underlying mechanism, all of satin, mirrored bevel, and then engine turned. Lots of fine finish here. Never think the company is so progressive and forward-looking that it forgets where horology came from. It never does. The watch wears easily on a smaller wrist, despite being 42.7 millimeters in diameter. You can see, especially since those lugs are able to change their geometry, the watch will fit well on a smaller wrist, and it's very flat and very light. Okay, a special piece from H. Moser and C. of Schaffhausen. This is the Pioneer Center Second with blue lagoon or turquoise dial. Now, whatever you call it, it's gorgeous. It has a lagoon blue or turquoise center. It's a metallic sunburst, and it is a fume fade from light at the center to almost black at the edge. The watch is 120 meters, water resistant, automatic winding with a 3-day power reserve, and it has plenty of lume, so this is a real sports watch. You can see Moser, always modest about branding, has used a clear lacquer to ghost its logo and name onto the dial side. The case flanks are beautifully evacuated and coined, polished in profile, and satinated on the top. The watch is 42.8 millimeters in diameter. On the reverse side, you can see manufactured caliber HMC 200, magic lever style pawl-based bidirectional winding system, 3-day power reserve. It has hacking seconds if you want to set it precisely. Moser makes everything, including the escapement, the hairspring, and the balance, which you can see is a free-sprung recessed bolt type. It also has a full balance bridge for better shock protection. The strap is a combination of textile and rubber on the bottom, and then we have a buckle that sort of matches the coined profile of the case for design parallelism. Taking a look on the wrist, it's a big watch, but it's not a huge watch. I have no problem wearing it, and I think a wrist down to 15 centimeters circumference could wear this quite comfortably. Moser makes about 2,000 watches a year out of Schaffhausen. They are a fully integrated manufacturer, and the fact that they're making the tough parts of the escapement, the balance, the hairspring, the parts that even a lot of movement manufacturers don't make in-house, that's profoundly impressive here. Now, a much more established integrated manufacturer, making decidedly more watches, offers you other options in sports watches. And here we have the Nautilus 5990 1A. Launched in 2014, this is probably the most versatile watch that Patek makes. Here, 40.5 millimeters in diameter by only 12.8 millimeters thick, we have a watch that is a flyback chronograph, well loomed, automatic winding, fully stainless steel, and equipped with a travel time function. Now let's take a look at how that travel time function works. Hidden in the wing profile at 9 o'clock, we have a pusher adjuster that allows you to move the local hour hand, and you can cover up that second time zone if you want to clean up the dial. The watch does include AM/PM indicators for both local and home time, so you can keep track of both. Most travel time watches just give you the home time, day-night, the place where you are not. The date sits up at the top, so you've got a date. We have gold hands, gold indices, and a fume dial, gray at the center, almost black at the edge with those striations that are iconic of the Nautilus and have been since 1976. The minutes register goes up to 60, which I love because I think that makes for a more functional watch. And despite all of the through fittings for chronograph and travel time pushers, it is still 120 meters water resistant. It's also a fairly easy watch to wear. The chronograph is vertical clutch and column wheel, so it has all of the modern standards for chrono, and automatic winding. It has a 55-hour power reserve, an anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, 6-position adjustment, and a free-sprung balance. Patek attests that these will run no worse than -3 + 2 seconds a day from the factory, and you can see it's a great fit. Even on a smaller wrist, it's big for a Nautilus, but it's small by the standards of sports watches that pack in this many features. Okay, taking a look at something even a bit more compact. If your tastes tend towards thinner, smaller, or more traditional, or even a little bit more ornate and dressy, that's what you get in the 5712 1A. This is the Nautilus moon phase, but it's more than that. It's a Nautilus 8.8 millimeters thick with a micro rotor automatic movement. It has a power reserve indicator up to 48 hours. It has a moon phase. It has a pointer style date that is coaxial with the moon phase, small seconds, white gold hands, and then a blue metallic fume dial that's sort of silver blue at the center and black at the edge. Now it is quite slim. If a standard 5711 is about 8.1 to 8.3, this is only half a millimeter thicker than that. So compared to something like a 5990, a 5980, or even a Nautilus annual calendar, this wears more like a 5711 in terms of how it fits across the wrist. It's narrow, and how thin and light it feels on the wrist, and that includes the thin and light feel of the bracelet. Now this also includes the caliber 240 micro rotor that we saw in the reference 6000 Calatrava a moment ago. Same, only you can see it's a later version, as this is the Patek Philippe seal. And here we have 6-position adjustment rather than the previous 5. And unlike the Calatrava 6000, this one features the later anti-magnetic silicone hairspring. So a few more refinements technically on this watch than you would see on that older dress timepiece we had earlier. This is a great watch to own and a very practical daily driver. And again, even though it is a dressier Nautilus, it's still surface swimmable with a screw-down crown and a 60-meter water resistance. There were a lot of great new Patek Philippe watches for 2021, but this might have been the best all-around offering. In many regards, I think this 59051A is what the 5905 should have been from the time it debuted back in 2015. Initially, it was a dress watch in platinum on a strap. This watch, in full steel, feels more like what the timepiece should have been. A bigger and sportier and somewhat stripped down 5960 flyback chronograph with annual calendar. So it is a flyback chronograph. It has the same base chronograph caliber as the 5990 you just saw. So automatic winding, anti-magnetic, 55-hour power reserve, free sprung, vertical clutch, column wheel, it's all those things. But significantly, it's also an annual calendar with an aperture-style display that's intuitive to read and highly legible. Again, we have that 60-minute chronograph register, but since it is a calendar, we have a day-night indicator in there, so when it turns blue, that's your cue not to use these pusher adjusters to adjust the date. It's an American-style calendar, so date, month, and it's an annual calendar, so it only needs to be adjusted once a year during the jump from February to March. Now, the watch is 42 millimeters in diameter, so it's bigger than the original 40.5 of the 5960. You can see Patek does a few things to pare down the apparent mass. The bezel is stepped back dramatically from the case flank and it's concave. The lugs are scalloped and evacuated, and they come to sharp tapered points. The dial is a lovely metallic green sunburst, and it's a sector dial, but the sectors are achieved with metal components, chapter rings, and then white gold hour indices. The timepiece has a bracelet that's a lot like the bracelet you'll find on an Aquanaut. If you see a 5167 1A, it's going to have a bracelet almost exactly like what you find here, which means quite robust and substantial. Visually, I think this watch is better matched to that bracelet than the smaller Aquanaut, as this 42 millimeter complication has a bit more body and substance and doesn't seem quite as overwhelmed by the bracelet proportionally as the Aquanaut does. It's an easy watch to wear because the lugs are so downwardly sloped at their edges. It's not a thick watch, so though a sporty watch, you can still wear it underneath the cuff. Very comfortable. I can recommend it for wrists as small as 15 centimeters in circumference. And again, sporty and steel with a full bracelet, automatic winding, and loom. This is a watch to wear full time. Here's something a little bit unusual. We don't have many quartz watches on this show, and we have even fewer quartz LED digital displays. This is a first in that regard. Here's a model that came out for 2022 in 820 pieces in a combination of black ceramic, rubber inlay, and then grade 5 titanium. So Girard-Perregaux is celebrating the 1976 to 1978 casquette, which was made in about 8,200 pieces, and I want to say that's the reference 9931. Well, this is a limited edition too, but they're only making 820 pieces, and you can see it includes a number of upgrades over the original. This watch has, let's go through the features. In fact, let's go through the features with the light off, because part of the fun of an LED is that it does have its own luminous force. So you have time, you can set the watch, having demonstrated that in abundance. The watch includes a number of functions: chronograph, second time zone, a secret date such as an anniversary or a birthday, a calendar, And of course, you can activate it 20 times a day for 2 years without wearing down the battery. So let's throw it on the wrist, take a quick look. It wears fairly easily. I would describe it as the equivalent of a 41 millimeter round watch, maybe. It's so short from end to end that I would even say maybe a 40 millimeter round watch. Now, of course, it has rubber inlays within the ceramic bracelet, so it feels comfortable against the wrist. The clasp is made of titanium, as is the case back. And Girard-Perregaux and Ulysse Nardin, newly independent, purchased by their management from Kering, which had owned them before. Now, the original casquette would have been made of gold, steel, or macrolon, which was basically a type of plastic. And this watch that you see is designed to give you the same look, but with greater durability. And it does use the Girard-Perregaux manufactured quartz caliber, just like the original. So though it is electronic, it is still all GP. Cycle through some of the features here. It's a little bit easier to demonstrate when the lights are out. Zoom in again, see if we can get this right. There's the seconds display, there's the calendar, there's the date. And this is the chronograph. A very cool retro driver style watch. All right, from weirdness, we go back to hallowed antiquity and classical watch design. By the way, I love that casquette. I call it weird in the most endearing sense possible. So 38 millimeters in platinum. This is the Vacheron Constantin Perpetual Calendar Chronograph 49005. 500 of these were made in rose gold, 300 in platinum. They were made from 1992 to 2002. And this is one of the very few Vacheron automatic winding dress perpetual calendars you'll find. Generally, the only other automatic perpetual calendar chronos that you'll find from Vacheron, and I do mean automatic winding perpetual calendar chronos, not perpetuals, are going to be overseas. So this is a dress watch that has a Frederic Piguet 1185 base with a perpetual calendar module on top. The lugs are built old school. As you can see, they're welded on. This is a very handcrafted, low-volume case. You can also see that the dial is made the same way, as the hands are polished by manual means and vaulted or barrel-shaped over their top. There's a handsome cruciform layout to the dial, and you can see we have a Sigma dial, as this watch, made during the 90s, was built during a period when Vacheron still included the a priori marks on its dials. This watch is about as sharp as they come. If you look at the character line that breaks the hoods of the lugs from the flank, if you look at the fullness of the metal, if you look at the sharpness and depth of the engravings on the back, this watch has every indication of having been rarely, if ever, polished, which is very important. Now, internally, the Frederic Piguet 1185 is an automatic winder made by Blancpain's movement partner, so it's a high horology movement, 5-position adjusted, hand-finished, vertical clutch, column wheel, all those standards, plus the addition of a perpetual calendar that does not need to be reset until the year 2100. It's an easy watch to wear too. Though weighty, all in platinum with a solid platinum case back, it's a nice fit. It's a unisex option, as this is an older standard of dress watch size and proportion, and it wears quite easily on a smaller wrist like mine. This might be the coolest overall watch on today's show. You're definitely not going to see another one like it. Remember, they only made 300 over a 10-year period. Okay, jumping into Rolex. I've only got one Rolex on the show today, but it's a good one. This is 116520. So this is the in-house caliber 40 millimeter pre-ceramic bezel with a black dial and silver register chapter rings. It's a V series, so 2009, 40 millimeters by 12.2 millimeters thick, 72-hour power reserve, vertical clutch, column wheel, 3-day power reserve, shock resistant, and well loomed. You can see on my wrist, it's a good fit. I know a lot of guys as well as gals who wear these Daytonas, and they are unisex options. It's the power watch for him or for her. The black dial with the steel is imposing, despite the fact that the watch itself is not very large. And you can see we have a bit of a transitional bracelet design. It's not quite as bare bones as the pre-2009 single locking clasp. This does include the beacon to hook internally, but the mechanism, the the milled components, they feel a little bit different than a modern clasp, and we're just charting the changes in terms of how they look and feel. But in terms of functionality, this is the same as the modern clasp. It has the double locking factor, the lift lock system, and then the clamshell. And then internally, we've got the easy link system, so you've got that 5mm tool-free snap-in, snap-out. Now, this watch also includes the Parachrom anti-magnetic hairspring. And this being a watch made in 2009, we're well into the Super Luminova era of Rolex, no tritium here. The timepiece is very dramatic, and the combination of the steel and the black dial is punchy. Not available anymore in steel, these metal bezels give the watch an entirely different look than the later ceramic. Okay, 3 from a Lange Söhne, and they're good ones. We're going to start with the Richard Lange. As you can see, this watch, fairly large for a 3-hand Lange dress watch, and I say fairly large for a watch that has no other functions. In yellow gold, this model launched in 2006, is 40.5 millimeters, so when you throw it on the wrist, it definitely makes a statement. It's large, it's visible, it's broad and saucer-like, a timepiece that's surprisingly easy to read, as not all dress watches are. There's a sharp contrast between the yellow gold hands and the silver white dial, and because this is a Richard Lange, we have those Roman numerals that pop so easily. You can also appreciate the fact that there's a little bit of color on this dial between the blued seconds hand, the yellow gold hour and minute hands, then the flashes of red at the quarters. It's surprisingly nuanced. The dial is made of sterling silver, galvanized, this silver white color. Turn it all over and you can see the movement is beautifully executed. We have right here a large manual wind 38-hour power reserve, extensively hand-finished caliber. So caliber L421, and you can see that it includes an elaborate hacking or stop seconds function. It also includes a refinement that's rare on Lange watches, an overcoil hairspring, as this model is dedicated to chronometry specifically. It's not dedicated to complication or a truly long power reserve. It's dedicated to keeping the best possible time while it is running. Now, if you want something that's a little bit more elaborate, here we have a 2015 limited edition of 200 pieces in platinum. This watch, not quite as large. This is the Lange Söhne 1815 F.A. Lange 200th anniversary, dedicated to the 200th anniversary of the birth of F.A. Lange, the father of modern watchmaking in Glashütte. We still have the sterling silver dial, only now it's black galvanized. Because this is an 1815 rather than a Richard Lange, we have Arabic numerals rather than Roman numerals. The watch, as you can see, powered by a movement that's a little bit less elaborate in layout than the 042. This is the 051. We now have a 55-hour power reserve. We have a smaller balance beating at 21.6. We still have a lot of fine hand finish, including black polished blued screws, engraved balance cock, Glashütte stripes, engine turning, and then mirrored anglage on the edge of the bridges. It's designed to look like a German pocket watch, just as every Lange caseback is designed to evoke the halcyon years of German pocket watches in the 19th century and early 20th century. So we've seen the 1815 and the Richard Lange collections. They also have the Saxonia collection at a Lange Söhne, and you know you're looking at a Saxonia when you have stick indices, and that's exactly what we have with the Datograph flyback. Now, this is the Datograph up-down. It's a bigger watch. There's no doubt about that. The timepiece, 41 millimeters compared to 39 millimeters for the original, here with a black galvanized silver dial and a rose gold case. The watch includes a lot of functionality. As you can see, it features a flyback chrono that you restart with a simple push of the trigger at 4. You don't have to stop at first. There's a power reserve indicator. The Datograph up-down has 60 hours of power reserve compared to the original Dato's 36. And the watch includes a double-digit date or panorama datum that gives you that distinctive double-date look. The date mechanism used was originally a JLC patent that was given to Lange by Günter Blumlein in the early 1990s. JLC went on to create another double-digit date that was even more advanced, but this one has remained something of a Lange signature, and it's still in production. You can see there's a pusher adjuster for the date, which is as pleasurable to use as the column wheel chronograph itself. Perhaps a little bit surprisingly for a dress watch, there's a tachymeter and there's lume, which makes this a fairly sporty chronograph. And when you flip it over, caliber L951 is in rare form. Okay, based on the original Datograph, a few things do change. For one thing, you get a much longer power reserve. Other than that, they decided not to mess with what worked. Now you can see the balance design is somewhat updated versus the original Dato. It's expressly designed as a free-sprung balance, but the combination of the column wheel, which is black polished and capped, the lateral clutch, which is fully jeweled, and then the nice slow 18K beat rate with an overcoil hairspring, all of that remains. Now, as I move the watch through the light, everything that turns black as I tilt the movement is black polished steel. Everything that has a golden hue is German silver, where the copper gives it that golden hue. We have both black polished and blued screws, and the difference between them is that in general, the polished screws are used for adjustment, and the blued screws are used for physical fixtures to fix things that don't move in place. You can see that all of the silver components are made of steel. They're satinated on their top, and then they're beveled on their sides, or they're black polished on their top and beveled on their side. And you can see that there are a number of sharp interior as well as exterior points inside the chronograph yoke itself, speaking to the quality of the finishing. It's not easy to accomplish that using stainless steel as the base material. It's easy to finish brass, it's easy to finish German silver, even gold, but steel and titanium are a bear to finish, and Lange impressively finishes the chronograph components to the same standard as the rest of the watch. This is a landmark piece, not just as a model. This is the original FP Journe Tourbillon remontoir, and that's great. But what really sets this one apart is how early it is. It has a serial number in the 70s, which means, yes, it is one of the first 80 FP Journe Tourbillon remontoir or tourbillon souverain ever made. So this is a third series watch, and you know that for a few reasons, but the giveaways are, of course, the flat remontoir cock, which means it's going to be a third or fourth series watch, and then it's got big dial side bolts fixing the dial to the movement. Big bolts means series 3, small bolts, this is just a rule of thumb, means series 4. Easy, accessible, easy to understand. We have a pale yellow gold dial, and as you can see, we have a tourbillon, which isn't really the standout feature of the watch. It's the tourbillon in tandem with the remontoir. Journe has commented that the key to this watch's precision lies in the constant force device, the free-sprung balance, the overcoil hairspring, the 6-position adjustment. He says that the tourbillon was only placed here for aesthetic purposes and traditional purposes. He worships Breguet. This is an homage, but the combination is a world premiere. Journe built his first tourbillon with remontoir back in 1991, and it was the prototype of the watch that he serialized starting in 1999. Now you can see this is an interesting watch because it has the name of the manufacturer and then the tagline of the company deeply stamped into the case back, but you can see that the actual engraving of the reference, the case year of manufacture, and then the model name is very shallow, which is characteristic of these early tourbillon souverain, tourbillon remontoir watches. Now you can also see that it features the hallmarks of both France and Switzerland, as well as the maker's mark of Eleanor, a French case maker that was Journe's case maker from his early pocket watch days through about mid-2008 when he bought the company and moved it to Geneva. The movement, of course, is brass bridges and plates, as all of these were until mid-2004. And then we've got a nice easy to trace power supply. So we have the crown wheel, the ratchet wheel atop the barrel, the click spring, a drivetrain that leads through this secondary escapement with a titanium linear spring, and for 28 hours of the 42-hour power reserve, you have this jumping indication that the remontoir is operating. That would later be redesigned to act as a jumping seconds display on the second generation tourbillon souverain. But you could see straight here through the dial, for 28 hours, the constant force device operates. So wind the watch at the same time daily, and the balance will always be impulsed with the same amount of energy, which allows outstanding isochronous performance and thus adjustment to very precise and ultimately accurate performance tolerances. This is a very important watch. This is one of the first 100 FP Journe tourbillon ever made, and again, it has a serial number in the 70s, so it's one of the first 80 ever made. 38 millimeters in platinum, a discontinued case size, a very important foundational watch, really, along with the resonance, one of the two foundational watches that helped to establish the reputation of watchmaking's most important independent manufacturer in an era when independents really are the entire scene. This is a very cool watch and a great way to get into Journe. If you have the budget, I'm not going to lie, it isn't cheap, but it is worth what it costs. And unlike a lot of watches in the current market, this is one that has projectable long-term value and relevance. Okay, now I have two watches made by, we're going to stick with our independent brand theme, two watches in white metal with blue dials made by German-speaking independent brands. We're going to start with the H. Moser & C Heritage Perpetual Calendar. This is the Heritage Blue Enamel, a 20-piece limited edition, 42 millimeters in diameter, launched for 2021. So it's part of Moser's Heritage series, which is one of their scarcest series. You don't see a lot of them. You see a lot of Endeavors, you see a lot of Pioneers, you even see a lot of Streamliners. But the Heritage is designed to look like a converted pocket watch, or perhaps an officer's watch, a field watch, or even a vintage pilot's watch. So here we have a 42 millimeter white gold case with wire style lugs, and then we have a lovely engraved and translucent lacquered Flinke enamel case band. So we have enamel on the case itself. Then we have enamel on the dial, and you can see that slight orange peel ripple characteristic of enamel. It's a fume fade, as Moser is wont to produce, so light at the center, darker at the edge. You can see we have vintage style hands, white gold, black polished, and we have a power reserve indicator. It is a manual wind power reserve, 7 days rated. In fact, it will run for almost 9 days. Andreas Streller, the independent watchmaking ace, designed the calendar system for Moser, so you can see how it is bi-directional. I can actually adjust it in either direction. I have a large date display, and then 12 hours, 12 months. This little stub index at the center indicates the month, and you can see I can quick set in either direction. Very few perpetual calendars are bi-directionally settable. Now I also have hacking seconds if I want to stop the movement and set the watch precisely to a reference time. Turn it over, HMC 800. The movement has 2 barrels, both set in golden chaton, fixed by jewels. Pocket watch style 3/4 bridge. It's not strictly a 3/4 because you can see it is broken up into a few pieces for ease of servicing, but it has the look of an encompassing 3/4 pocket watch bridge. 18K beat rate, solid gold, 14 karat escapement for minimal friction, overcoil hairspring. Moser makes all the tough parts of the movement. Anyone can make bridges, plates, and wheels. Wheels are a little bit more challenging than bridges and plates, but if you really want to show your chops, make escapements, balances, and hairsprings. Moser makes all of those for this watch. It's a free-sprung balance architecture with a full bridge, so it's fairly sturdy in construction, and the overcoil means that in any position, the watch will keep consistent time because the mass of an overcoil hairspring is very close to the balance staff. It is super centered. This watch is a 20-piece limited edition, and rarely for a Moser, it includes a full deployant clasp. They usually include pin buckles. This one is in white gold to match the watch, and if you're wondering, yes, Moser uses gray gold, a white gold that is white all the way through and never needs to be rhodium plated. For a 42, it wears pretty compact, and that's down to the wire lug design, which is short across the wrist and highly convenient. It's a lovely watch, and frankly, this is the Moser I love best, the inventive, low-volume, craft-level Moser. I'm not a fan of some of the more mass-produced watches, but this is a Moser I would proudly wear every single day, eye-popping front and back. It's a technical tour de force and an aesthetic masterpiece, understated, rich in detail, beautiful as a whole, but subtle, the way a German-Swiss watch should be. Remember, Moser is the other integrated manufacturer out of Schaffhausen. IWC makes about 100,000 watches a year. Moser makes about 2,000, and the difference matters. Now, speaking of a company that only makes about 200 to 400 watches a year, this is one of the coolest independents going. We just don't see them much. Moritz Grossmann of Glashütte was founded back in 2008 in the heart of the financial crisis, and founded by a watchmaker, Christine Hutter. It managed to pull through, showing both grit and determination. This here is the Moritz Grossmann High Art that combines everything I love about the company. First, a wearable case, 41 millimeters in stainless steel. You can see you're not paying for precious metal here. The case is beautifully made. The lugs are handsomely broken from the case band, and there's a little bit of inward inflection to the lug profiles. You can also see that the watch has a dial that is made of sterling silver and then blued. You can see there's a rosette pattern cut reductively into the sub-seconds, and then we have a soleil radiating out from an imaginary center point at the base of the dial. The hands are immaculately handcrafted, both in the way they're cut and in the way they're polished, and the company, as you can see, has ghosted the logo down to the underside of the crystal along with the individual indices for the minutes track. Now, the watch allows you to pull the crown out, and when you do so, it stops the balance and activates hacking second. But note, the crown moves back flush to the case. So as I set this watch, I can't push the crown back in. It's in a setting mode until I press the button below and I re-engage the drive. Now, once I re-engage the drive, you can see I did so without the hands moving at all. Once I've set them in position, I re-engage the drive without accidentally moving the hands. Because the crown is always flush during the setting, you never have to worry about pushing it back in and removing the precise setting you've already applied. Now, on the reverse side, you can see why I've long considered Moritz Grossmann watches to be more exquisitely detailed than Lange. And here's the reason. Look what you can do when you're making 1/10 as many watches, maybe less than 1/10 as many watches as Lange, maybe 1/12. We have huge luminous stripes across the German silver bridges. You can see how broad these stripes are. They need to be applied slowly to create this sharp gradient from light to dark. You can also see it's not just the balance cock that's been hand engraved. It's not just the structure adjacent. It's the entire set of bridges and plates as everything. The characters, the letters, the numbers, all of it freehand engraved into the bridges. The ratchet wheel is solarized 1, 2, 3 separate times manually. And if you look carefully, they have a feature I've often shouted out when I've had Carrie Voudalin and watches in, which is the beveling of the teeth of the ratchet wheel and the crown wheel. You can see we have both black polished screws and we have fired screws, but they're not blued, they're browned. To create this brown violet is a more delicate operation than bluing a screw. You can fire a screw all day and it'll come out beautifully blue, but timing and feel are necessary to get this brown violet color. You can also see that they use clear sapphires rather than synthetic rubies, simply because it better matches the pale, subtle luxury of this watch. It's almost like you're looking at the foam of a fine brew. Taking a look in profile, you can see that the beveling is all done by hand. You can even see a little bit of the beveling of those ratchet wheel teeth I told you about. You can also see that there's a black polished micrometric regulator that's based on a screwed rack for fine timing adjustments. It's a 42-hour power reserve, and what's impressive here, and we'll stop the balance, is that Moritz Grossmann is making its own recessed bolt free-sprung balance. It has an overcoil hairspring for fine timekeeping in every position, and this is adjusted in multiple positions. And you can see that the escape wheel and the pallet are both black polished, and even the bridge bearing the anchor has been beveled on its side, so attention to detail really matters here. They've recessed the bolts so that they don't enter the free airstream, and I'll show you how you reset and restart the watch using the release trigger down below the crown. This is as good as finishing gets in Germany. It's subtle, but it's beautiful, and what's more important is the closer you get, the more beautiful it becomes. That is the ultimate signature of fine finish. Now, when you throw the watch on the wrist, this high art piece with its gorgeous guilloche dial is subtle. The branding is minimal, the look is low key, and it's flat enough to fit underneath the cuff. Reach out, if you like this watch or any you just saw, to tmosso@thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.